Guests in RollerCoaster Tycoon will start throwing up once their nausea reaches 128, which is about halfway through the nausea meter. From that point on, the chance of vomiting goes up pretty linearly, reaching a 25% chance every 12.8 seconds at maximum nausea. And they can only puke if they're walking, so they're safe if they're at a bench, for example. Hi guys, my name's Juniper Dev, and today we're talking all about throwing up in RollerCoaster Tycoon, the 20-year-old relic of a game that it is. Huge thanks to Newbie for inviting me to the channel and for writing this next line that I'm about to say. The puddle of vomit appears on exactly frame 16 of the puking animation. Did you know that? And there's only 2 possible vomit sprites. Some sources online say that the color of the guest's vomit depends on what they ate, which would be awesome, but that doesn't really appear to be the case. The 2 variants are randomly assigned when a guest is born with a 50-50 chance, so you're kind of just genetically predisposed to one of the 2 colors. And the animation itself is also accompanied by one of 4 puking sounds. Now, the game does give you a few visual hints before the guest actually throws up. If you inspect a person, you'll see that they have a face icon that reflects their current mood. Nausea itself is tracked as a value from 0 to 255, and that represents how sick a guest is feeling. At 140, the guest starts looking a little bit worried. At 170, it turns completely green. And when it hits 200, it's over. Puking is imminent. That gives us 3 clear tiers that are exactly 30 points apart. Puking can technically happen even before any of these faces appear. The probability is already greater than 0 at 128 nausea, so in rare cases, the guest can just throw up without any prior warning or visual indicator. Each tier is also tied to changes in how the guest will behave. At the first level, they start walking at half speed, they hold their hands to their mouth, and they start thinking about how sick they're getting. The second tier comes with a different walking animation, and their skin gets all green and funky, but they don't have any new thoughts. At the final tier, there's no new walk cycle, but they're really feeling it and they're really thinking about it. The only thing that can override a sick face is when a guest is very angry and they get prone to breaking things and becoming a vandal. The game just considers that state a little bit more important to convey to the player. And the sick walking animations are replaced by item animations like holding a balloon or an umbrella, wearing a hat, but not by tiredness or the animation when they need to go to the bathroom, for example. But when a guest finally throws up, their nausea is reduced in 2 ways. It immediately drops by 30 points, which is usually enough points to bring them down 1 tier on the visual sickness scale, and then it gradually continues falling until it's at about half of its original value. Internally, the game is tracking 2 nausea values. There's the current one, and then the one that the game is moving towards. Whenever something happens that increases or relieves nausea, the target is updated, and then the current value slowly adjusts to it over time. That smoothing is what makes changes in nausea feel more natural and gradual. And you know what else is smooth? Oh, the transition into today's sponsor. I'll pass it off to Newbie for this one.
This video is sponsored by GameMaker. GameMaker is the engine behind games like Katana Zero, recent hit The King is Watching, and one of my personal favorites, Archvale. GameMaker is known as a great entry-level engine, but it's also powered some absolute classics. Even Undertale was made in GameMaker, and it's one of the best-rated and best-selling games ever. With that level of success, it's no surprise that Toby Fox stuck with GameMaker for Deltarune too. I asked our host Juniper Dev what she likes most about GameMaker, and she wanted to give a shout-out to GML Visual. That's the visual coding mode where you build logic by dragging and dropping action blocks. It's great if you want to understand how code flows without needing to program in the traditional way. On top of that, there's a huge learning ecosystem around GameMaker, with tons of official tutorials on YouTube and a very friendly community on Discord. Honestly, I think it's one of the best options out there if you want to start making games but feel overwhelmed or don't know where to begin. You can use GameMaker for free for non-commercial projects, and if you go commercial, it's just a one-time payment. Pretty rare these days. I encourage you to download GameMaker using the link in the description. And now let's get back to Juniper Dev and the technical side of puking.
Hi, I'm back. Now, nausea increases as a direct result of riding attractions. Each ride in the game has 3 ratings. There's excitement, intensity, and nausea. Unlike excitement, where higher is generally better, or intensity, where the ideal level depends on guest preferences, nausea is always something that you want to keep low. Basically, the lower the nausea, the better for the guests. From the player's perspective, this rating is shown in one of 6 categories, from low to ultra extreme. Not just extreme, no. Ultra extreme. Internally, those map to increasing ranges of 256 points each, which in-game are displayed as values stepping by 2.56. Now, all kinds of ride features can influence this value. Excessive lateral g-forces can add 200 to 800 points to the Nausea rating. And yeah, this game takes physical properties like lateral Gs into account and how they contribute to nausea, even for roller coasters made by the player, which is an insane level of detail for a game made in the late 90s. Like, every guest is made with its own built-in tolerance to nausea, just like real life. There are 4 possible levels. There's none, low, average, and high, and each of them map to a different internal tolerance value. When a guest is born into the beautiful world of RollerCoaster Tycoon, they're given one of these tolerance levels randomly, but it's not with the same probability. Internally, this is done with a small range of numeric values that map to each category. Under normal conditions, only the first 8 values of that range are used, which means most guests end up with an average tolerance. But in scenarios where guests are meant to prefer more intense rides, the game will shift that range upwards, which removes the lowest values from the pool completely, and now our new most common tolerance is high. When a guest is deciding whether or not they want to hit up a ride, the game compares that ride's nausea rating with the guest's tolerance for nausea. But it also takes their happiness into account. The more fun that a guest is having, the happier they're doing, the more that they're willing to put up with, and the more nausea they're willing to tolerate. When that happiness is maxed out, that can add up to 255 points to the guest tolerance, which is a huge boost. A guest who has no natural tolerance but is having the time of their life can still go on some high nausea rides. And in contrast, a guest that has a high tolerance but is really sad is probably still going to accept going on the higher nausea rides, but they might turn down the most extreme ones until their mood improves. If a guest approaches a ride that's just too much for their tolerance, they won't ride it. Instead, they'll just look at the ride and think about how sick it makes them feel, and then their happiness drops 8 points. And somehow, even with all of that, tolerance is still not the only factor. A guest's current nausea level also acts as a cutoff. Once it goes over 160, which is about 60% through the nausea meter, guests are only going to go on rides that have a rating of 140 or less. Interestingly enough, this threshold doesn't line up with any of the visual sickness tiers, and the 140 rating doesn't match any of the ride nausea categories that are given to the player either. It falls roughly in the lower half of the low range. Surprisingly enough, the guest's nausea tolerance doesn't just define a maximum, but it also defines a desired minimum level of nausea. That's what the game uses to really decide how satisfied a guest is after a ride. Whether a guest enjoyed a ride depends on a lot of things like the price, how long they were waiting for, and whether or not they've ridden it before. But it also depends on how well the ride's intensity and nausea matches the guest's individual preferences. If a ride's nausea rating falls nicely within the minimum and the maximum preference of nausea for a guest, then it scores pretty high. If it doesn't, then the game uses that guest's happiness to stretch the range a little bit and make it more forgiving, especially on the less nauseating rides. Ride nausea ratings and the guest's nausea tolerance are fixed values, but the nausea level itself is constantly changing. Nausea obviously goes up when a guest gets on a ride, but how much it goes up depends on the nausea rating of the ride and then also a bunch of other stuff. Happier guests build up nausea slower, guests with full stomachs build it faster, and a guest's natural nausea tolerance reduces the final impact of the ride. But let me give you a few examples so this is easier to understand. Let's say that we got 2 little guys with the same starting level of nausea. They're going on the same ride that has a medium nausea rating. The first one has a high tolerance, he's in a great mood, and he's only mildly hungry. The second guy has a low tolerance, he just ate, and he is not having a good time. Even though the ride itself and the starting points of nausea are the same, the outcome is completely different. The first guest is only a little bit more nauseous than he was before, but the second guy is really going through it. He's almost at his limit and he is on the verge of throwing up. Low happiness and a full stomach strongly amplify the effect of a ride, while a low tolerance only partially mitigates it. In that second example with our poor little victim, vomiting is very much expected. Now, when a guest does throw up, their nausea is cut in half, like we saw earlier. And vomiting increases their hunger level, so emptying their stomach puts them in a better state for the next ride. Now, you might be thinking that you could capitalize on that increased hunger to then boost your food sales, which, ethics aside, is obviously #1 priority here, but that won't work. Once a guest hits over 140 nausea, they just stop buying food and drinks altogether, which, is really realistic, so that's cool. Other than throwing up, guests can reduce their nausea in a few different ways. Obviously, if someone's just chilling, doing nothing, then their nausea is going to slowly go down over time. Sitting down on a bench is going to reduce that even more, about 5 times faster than walking, but only down to about 50 nausea. And guests are actively going to hunt down a bench once their nausea hits above 170, which matches the second face icon and walking animation. Now, if their nausea ever gets above 200, then they go straight to first aid. In these shelters, which are infinite, and they can house an infinite number of sick guests, nausea drops 40 times faster than walking and about 8 times faster than sitting. Guests leave the first aid room at 35 nausea, but in practice, it shows as 0 because the meter's a bit funky. Now, if somehow none of this helps and a guest is just predestined to throwing up, then a handyman's gonna pull up and he's gonna clean up the mess. Handymen are also in charge of emptying bins, watering gardens, and mowing grass, but their top priority is always picking up litter and sweeping vomit. All staff follow a shared global clock, but it's offset by their number. So when a guest throws up or they drop litter, not everyone rotates to it at the same time. That small desynchronization makes it a lot more natural than having the hive mind of handymen zoom to the nearest vomit puddle. Every handyman is in charge of the 7x7 tile area around them. Anything that's beyond that perimeter, outside their patrol area, or is blocked in the game is completely ignored. They always go for the closest piece of litter using the Manhattan distance, which basically just means no diagonals. And in their brains, they weigh vertical movement as 4 times more expensive and not worth it as horizontal movement. In practice, that means that moving up or down as a handyman is heavily discouraged, so they're more likely to move side to side. So with that system, vomit directly competes with food wrappers and empty cans. They're all equal in the eyes of the handyman. If a handyman locks in on vomit, they're going to follow it about 90% of the time. The exception being when they're inside of a ride queue, which drops the probability to about 10%. I think that helps avoid pathfinding issues maybe and just awkward behavior. Once they reach their target tile, the sweeping animation begins, and the vomit disappears on frame number 9 of that animation. All litter on the tile is cleaned at once in a single sweep, and that could, in theory, mean hundreds of puddles at once. There is a global cap of 500 units of litter and vomit present on the game at any time, but it's pretty unlikely that that cap is ever going to be reached on the same tile. If the handymen are ever slacking and a park gets really dirty, then it can even get the most untidy award. That happens when over 1/16 of the total guests are thinking about how untidy the place is. One of the thoughts that counts for this is, this path is disgusting, and it works like this. As your guests are walking through the park, the game will keep track of how many puddles of vomit the guests have stepped over in their last 3 steps. If that accumulated exposure ever hits more than 3, which could mean that you have 3 units of vomit on the same tile, yuck, then the guest has a 17% chance to think about how dirty the park is and lose happiness. This check happens every single step as long as the condition is met, but if the guest gets onto some clean tiles quickly enough, then they don't even notice. These thoughts don't just enable the most untidy award, but they also block others. If at least 5 guests are thinking about how disgusting and rank and stinky the park is, then the park cannot get the most tidy award. And if over 15 guests have that thought, then the most beautiful award is now off the table. Vomit even affects the overall park rating, which is a really important metric for just accomplishing the objectives in the game. The park rating itself comes from, obviously, the puke, but then also the excitement for the rides, the total number of happy guests, the total casualties, stuff like that. Puke kind of has an indirect impact just by lowering the guest happiness, but it does have one direct effect. Your rating is reduced by how much vomit exists in the park. Any vomit or litter that stays unclean for over 3 minutes and 12 seconds starts to count against you. And every puddle, every piece reduces your rating by 4 points. That's how it's supposed to work, at least. In the original game, there was a bug that allowed this penalty to be applied immediately. It skipped the 3-minute age check completely. This was later fixed in OpenRCT 2, which is an open source reimplementation of RollerCoaster Tycoon 2, and that's what Newbie's been using as the main source for this video. Now, the penalty of vomit is capped at -600 points, which is huge. For comparison, the maximum bonus that you can get from happy guests who are having a great time and loving your park is only 500 points. Reaching that penalty means that you have 150 puddles of vomit or pieces of litter in your park. Hey, congratulations. Now, you might be thinking that that's super unrealistic and that it's really hard to get that many puddles of vomit. But there is one thing that you can do. If you name one of your guests Felicity Anderson, everyone around them is going to start projectile vomiting, regardless of their nausea status, regardless of everything else that we talked about in this video. I don't know if the creator of this game just had beef with someone named Felicity, maybe? Strange, unexplained cheat aside, it really is amazing how deep this puking mechanic goes. It's realistic, it's fun, and it was made in the 90s. That's why RollerCoaster Tycoon is a classic, and why its one creator, Chris Sawyer, is a legend. Anyway, my name's Juniper Dev. Thank you so much for watching. You can find my channel and my information in the description below. But if you liked this video, then make sure you subscribe to Newbie, who I thank so much for having me on the channel. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye!